So let me introduce Heather and Julie, and we can get started. I'm looking forward to this guides workshop on qualitative analysis, a primer. It's something I don't know very much about, something I'd like to know more about, and I am looking forward to hearing what Heather and Julie have to present. Heather and Julie have been associated with NACP for some time, and I've seen their research progress move on to bigger and bigger things. And I'm really curious about what they're going to tell us about today. So take it away, Julie.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We're going to just briefly introduce ourselves as the facilitators so everyone kind of knows who we are. So I'm Heather Williamson. I'm an associate professor at Northern Arizona University. And Julie, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. We know you. I'm Julie Armin, assistant professor at the University of Arizona in Family and Community Medicine. And I'm going to toss it over to Austin, who is co-facilitating with us today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Austin Duncan. I work with the Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities at the University of Arizona College of Medicine.
And Sarah?
It's nice to see everyone. I'm Sarah Schumann, and I'm an assistant clinical professor in public health at NAU.
Great. Thank you. So we're glad to be here today. And as Ron mentioned, this is an overview of qualitative method. We like to make sure we frame it that way. So you realize that, we're going to kind of try to give you this really big, broad overview, just knowing that we could probably spend hours on just interviews or just focus groups alone, right? So this is just meant to be kind of an overview so that for those of you that maybe haven't worked in the qualitative research space and you were thinking about it and you're wanting to work with a qualitative researcher, kind of how would you start going about having those conversations? What kind of questions might be top of mind for you? And then also, we're hoping that for those of you that attend today, we'll think about how qualitative methods really can contribute to your area of science. And we hope that you would think about bringing on qualitative researchers as your research team to help you plan through and do that type of work collaboratively. So just an agenda for today. We're going to define what we mean by qualitative research. We're going to go over the strengths and limitations. Every research has its strengths and limitations, right? So we're going to go over kind of the general strengths and limitations of qualitative work. Then you're going to work in small in breakout rooms where you're going to think about your area of science and how you think qualitative, come up with a qualitative research question. And we'll help you with that process. It'll be kind of all of us in breakout rooms together. And then we're going to go over some theoretical approaches in qualitative methods, go over some more commonly used qualitative data collection methods, the kind of the pluses and minuses of each. And then you'll go back into your breakout rooms and thinking about your qualitative research questions, kind of brainstorm what kind of data collection methods do you think would be a good fit for the questions you're trying to answer. And then we'll give you an overview of qualitative analysis, and then we'll leave you with some resources to use and just any kind of questions and discussion. So how do we define qualitative methods? So qualitative methods are really a means for exploring and understanding the meaning that individuals or groups ascribe to a social or human problem. So you're really trying to go in and kind of explore and understand, right? You're not hypothesis testing. You're really trying to get an in-depth understanding of an issue. The research process often involves emerging questions and ideas. You don't go into it kind of thinking you already know the answers. You're really open to kind of these new ideas and these new questions that may come from the data you're capturing. And you're really focused on context and complexity of situations and experiences. That's a benefit of qualitative methods. It really allows you to understand kind of the complexity of something that may seem like a simple thing, a simple situation, but may be very complex for the people that you talk to in terms of their experience. Thinking of something for this group, you could be talking to people about their experience getting a cancer screening. That may seem like a very simple thing, but for that person, that may be very complex. And so talking to them about that experience, understanding what it feels like from their point of view is really helpful. And then, of course, you'll generate some novel or new insights into a phenomenon that may otherwise be difficult to measure. So maybe it's something, often people use qualitative, it's an area that someone hasn't really done enough science in to say, well, this is how you should measure that issue. So maybe you want to start out qualitatively first, understand kind of what are the key constructs and ideas that then you maybe could then measure quantitatively down the road. So qualitative is different than quantitative because it's more exploratory than confirmatory, right? So you're not testing a hypothesis here. You're really exploring an issue. You're not confirming a cause of any kind of relationships. You tend to be a lot more focused on the meaning and the context, and it tends to be less generalizable. Qualitative work is often considered to be what's called transferable. So if I look at your study and I can identify that the context in which your study occurred, I can think of how I could transfer that understanding to my area of practice. You're not looking to make, from a sample to a larger population, generalizable responses here. And it's often perceived as more subjective, although we like you to lead today knowing that it is not, because it is a very systematic approach that goes into collecting qualitative data as well as analyzing qualitative data. So there's that kind of, I think is a little bit of a misperception. And qualitative research has really high validity because it's, you're hearing the voices and the experiences from the people. So you're validating kind of the understanding of the issue. Sometimes reliability can be a little bit harder to achieve in terms of replicating, right, your study. It's similar to quantitative because both have stated research questions, purposes they're trying to answer. We both interpret your data through analytic techniques, and both are attempting to understand human behavior. So this kind of gives you like a side-by-side look at qualitative and quantitative. So in qualitative, your approach is primarily inductive. You're kind of letting the meaning and the understanding come from the data, from the experiences of the people that you're interviewing or doing focus groups with. Whereas quantitative, you're more of a deductive, like you kind of already know what you're measuring, and you're just trying to deduce what that data kind of tells you. The goal with qualitative is a lot of depth and breadth, with the idea that you may generate a hypothesis to test further on in a quantitative study. And then qualitative, the setting is not, you're not doing experimental conditions, right? You don't have people randomized into a control intervention group. You're talking to people, you're capturing their experiences in real time in their communities. So it's not an experimental or kind of random sampling kind of approach you would use. You're using a purposeful approach. You want to find the people who can best answer your research question. So who are the people who would be most informative to answer your research question? And you kind of define who those people might be. And then you purposely go out and try to find those people to be in your qualitative study. Data collection tools would be things like interview guides, observational tools, discussion guides for focus groups, versus in quantitative, you're probably going to have closed-ended surveys and more administrative data sets. And then, of course, in analysis, we'll go over that a little bit towards the end of the session, but it's going to be more of an iterative interpretation, kind of coming together and coming to consensus on what you're seeing in the qualitative data to help you then draw your conclusions to answer your research question. Versus in quantitative, you're going to be running some very specific statistical tests that best align with the type of data that you have and maybe doing some modeling. So what are some of the benefits of qualitative research? You get a lot of really rich and detailed information because your data is typically transcribed data. So you'll do an interview with somebody, one-on-one interview, and maybe the interview lasts an hour. And then you transcribe that. Very often they'll be transcribed verbatim, meaning word for word. And you could end up in a one-hour interview with 30 pages of textual information that then you are going through and kind of analyzing after to kind of see what the answer to your research question is. So you have a lot of rich and very detailed data. You're leaving the participant perspectives intact. So very commonly seen in qualitative research, when you see people present it in papers or at conferences, they very commonly will be showing you direct quotes from participants. So you are actually hearing about the experience in the exact same way that they had described it. So you're not taking away kind of any voice from the participant in that way. Again, you have a lot of context. It's open to new ideas and concepts. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a study thinking, I thought maybe I understood the issue, and I do my first focus group, and I think I would never have thought about that. And so it leaves you as a researcher really open to new concepts and to understand the phenomenon. It's very useful for studying unique situations. It's also extremely responsive to stakeholder needs, right? Because if you're saying to stakeholders who are the people that maybe you're doing the interviews, the focus groups with, I mean, it's a conversation you're having, right? So they are feeling heard, understood. They know someone is there that kind of cares about the issue and wants to understand it, so they can be, help share what we've learned to kind of maybe move policy, practice, maybe areas of future research. And it's preferred, obviously, when you're exploring the how or why something happens. And again, I think I kind of hit this a little bit, but just by the study process alone, it really is I think, an excellent approach when you're trying to build engagement, build connection, kind of build collectives around an issue. Like any research, there's challenges to this, right? So it's time intensive. It's the data collection analysis can be very labor intensive. I mentioned to you the example of 1 hour interview giving you 30 pages of text. Well, imagine you did 20 interviews. So you have hundreds of pages of text. You spend all the time, and it's we say labor intensive. There's a lot of time that goes into preparing for data collection. You spend a lot of time writing your interview guide, refining it, just your focus group guide. You want to really make sure those questions are in the right order, in the right format. And that can take a lot of time to get that in the right space. And then you, as the researcher who are going to be doing the interviews or doing the focus groups, are going to spend a lot of time preparing yourself. So when you go into that data collection experience, that you are prepared, because you're part of the collection experience. And so if you're not prepared with understanding the questions and keeping the dialogue going, you may not get the information that you're hoping to hear from your participants. And then afterwards, you have all this transcribed data that you get to go through and look at and very closely with your team and kind of come to consensus on what you think you're seeing from those results. So that's, when you think about labor intensive, that's kind of trying to give you a context of the amount of time it takes. And it's a good thing too, though, right? Because you're being very cautious and careful and mindful of people's time that you're asking to share their stories. But there is a lot of kind of prep that goes into doing this type of work. So time consuming, I hit that already. You're not going into qualitative work trying to make predictions. You're going in there trying to develop understanding. And again, I mentioned this earlier, it might not be as generalizable as quantitative because you don't have statistical tests that you can say, oh, here's our p-value. And so we can extrapolate this to generalize to a larger population. But again, it can be more transferable to people's experiences, and they can use that for context.
As Heather mentioned earlier, the research questions that are best answered via qualitative approaches are really the why and how questions, and deepening your understanding of why and how. So for instance, the 2 bullet points here are based on a project that I am co-investigator on. It's a randomized controlled trial. We're testing an intervention. And we're doing some qualitative data collection to explore why participants are more likely to adhere to treatment A than to treatment B. And so this gives us a sense of are they having the intervention in question uses some technology, the need for a phone. And so, are they having technical issues? Are they just not engaged with the content? And then also examining how the participants are using the intervention. So are they continuing to use the skills that we're teaching them in the intervention, 6 months out after they've finished the study, which can really tell us quite a bit about the effectiveness of the intervention. And on the next slide, we talk a little bit, we're going to drop some terminology on you, EMIC, the EMIC perspective. Really, as Heather mentioned, it's qualitative work is best for understanding what your participants think. So that's the EMIC perspective, that's the insider perspective, and the EDIC perspective is the outsider perspective. So that's the researchers, what we want to know. And oftentimes I've gone into interviews where someone seems to be telling me something that I'm not as a researcher, I'm not cued into. And initially, I have to check that researcher side of myself at the door and listen to what they're saying. And oftentimes the richest insights come from what you're really not expecting. And Heather mentioned that earlier. So you're allowing participants to define their perceptions of themselves. So I've asked people what it means to be a cancer survivor and gotten lots of different responses to that are not necessarily aligned with what I would expect. And also encouraging your participants' explanations of what it's like to live with a particular medical condition. So what meaning does it have for them? We know, I mean, even if you're not a qualitative researcher, I'm sure you've read literature or been exposed to a lot of public health education around cancer, and this idea that cancer in particular is a life-changing event. And so, what does that mean to an individual for that to be life-changing? And in some of my research, I've found that it's not entirely life-changing because people have a lot of other issues in their lives that are difficult. and so I think really important to understand the EMIC perspective. And then on the next slide, we in the background here, I've been dividing you all up into breakout rooms. And Sarah and Austin are going to lead our discussions in the breakout rooms. We have 2 rooms. And I think I'll just set the timer for 10 minutes and see how it goes. And maybe Heather, you and I can text each other if it seems like the conversation is kind of lagging a little bit. But we want you to develop a qualitative research question about an element of your research, which sounds very simple, but is not. And so I will open the breakout rooms, and you should be receiving an invitation to join. Maria and Tia, I'll leave you in here.
Sounds good. Great.
Okay. welcome back, everybody. It was, we realized how short 10 minutes is in our group. Hopefully everybody has at least one question about an element of your research. We had multiple, and so we'll be referring back to those questions in the next breakout room. But for now, we're going to share a little bit with you about theoretical approaches and qualitative methods. And here's our pitch. So I think that it often seems like we're just asking questions of people, and we are, but our approach is guided by theory. And so here's the pitch: to have somebody who's trained in qualitative research on your team from the beginning of from the conceptualization of the project, because they will bring in these lenses. And so we're going to go through a few of these lenses just to kind of give you a sense of what they are. And so Heather, can you move us forward? So here we go. So these are just a few, and there are others. And what you'll discover is that, you know, oftentimes we kind of combine a lot of these approaches. I know I frequently use a narrative approach and a phenomenological approach, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So in narrative research, you're really exploring the life of an individual and their story. You may be studying one individual or, you know, multiple individuals, but you're really getting into their narrative, how they understand. I shared earlier, you know, how somebody understands their cancer survivorship journey. And really for this, the best kind of research problem that is suited for this approach is really if you're wanting to understand stories of individual experiences. And this has come up, this came up in our small group actually. And so I'll flag this because I think this might be a good approach. And the origins of the narrative research really come from a lot of the different social and behavioral sciences, which you can see here. And on the next slide is phenomenology, which is something that I mentioned previously that I often use. I think health research lends itself very nicely to the narrative and phenomenological approach, because in phenomenology, you're really understanding the essence of experience. You know, you can describe someone's narrative about having a drain after surgery, say breast surgery, and having to you know, empty that drain, and that process of emptying the drain on a daily basis and caring for that incision and making sure it doesn't get infected. And so really getting at the essence of that and the work involved in that. Oftentimes this involves studying several individuals who have a shared experience. So the example I just shared, several individuals who have had breast surgery. And really this is best suited for trying to describe a lived phenomenon. So what are the challenges for somebody who has a job that is physically demanding to have to, you know, recover after breast surgery and address the needs of their drains and having kind of protecting their incisions. And so again, a lot of phenomenology actually came out of philosophy. It was a concept developed by a philosopher, but it's been taken up in a lot of social sciences. And next, grounded theory, which is probably something that a lot of you have heard about, I would imagine. I feel like that's something that is discussed quite a bit in qualitative research, health research in particular. It was developed by some sociologists at UCSF, medical sociologists, and really the focus of grounded theory is to develop a theory grounded in data from the field. So you're using that data to develop a social theory, an understanding of an experience, an understanding of a phenomenon. And so really you're studying processes and action or interaction involving individuals. And so often grounded theory, the medical sociologists who developed this concept were working within healthcare institutions and looking at the work of healthcare providers and developing theories based on those observations and those qualitative data points that they were collecting. And so you're grounding this theory in the views of the participants who are in your study, and then developing hypotheses based on that. So in the case, although Corbin and Strauss were not, who are the developers of grounded theory, were not into, as far as I know, developing interventions, but if they had they were studying an institution and learned that the nurses in the hospital were taking extra time at a particular station for something that was unnecessary, then maybe they could develop an intervention to address that. And they would hypothesize this intervention would have some effect on the time taken to do whatever process it is. So, and on the next slide, this is the cornerstone of my discipline and Austin's discipline. This is ethnography, and it really is focused on describing and interpreting a cultural process or feature, and it includes participant observation. And actually, Francine is an anthropologist as well, so she knows about ethnography as well. So it really, you're looking at a cultural phenomenon. So like the use of a particular medication, and you may look at this use of a medication from a variety of perspectives. So thinking about the group on the call today, I read a really interesting ethnography about the use of the HPV vaccine. And they used qualitative data from pharmaceutical companies all the way down to like interactions between patients and providers, and how providers discussed the vaccine. So really it's kind of, it takes a systems approach. It really describes patterns and shared understandings, or what we call epistemology, or how we know what we know. How do we know that the HPV vaccine works the way that it does? And that knowledge is different depending on who you talk to. And then case study. I would imagine a lot of us here are very familiar with this. It's commonly used in medicine, also in psychology. It's developing an in-depth description and analysis of a case or multiple cases. It often studies an event or diagnosis in one individual, or treatment in one individual, or a program. You could do a case study of a program participant, or sometimes you do case studies of multiple individuals. But it really helps you get an in-depth understanding of a particular case or cases, if that may be your interest.
Okay, so now we're going to transition into, now that you have these kind of theoretical approaches and understanding, and depending on your research question you're trying to answer or purpose you're trying to accomplish, that that often will help define kind of what's the right theoretical approach to use, right? And then also should also guide what's the right kind of data collection process I should go through qualitatively to answer that question. We think about qualitative data collection, there's kind of this continuum. Some is purely exploratory. So you're maybe just going into, say, doing an informal observation. You're going in, you're just going to take some open notes about what you're seeing, versus a more systematic approach where you may have some things you're actually looking for, but you're still jotting down some qualitative notes about other things you're seeing that maybe were unexpected. A lot of what we do falls here somewhere in the middle. So there's a little bit of a semi-structured approach. Like you kind of go into the dialogue, or to your analysis of existing resources with some guidance of the type of information you're going to want to capture, but you're still open to new ideas. And so these are the four most common, right, data collection methods you'll see in qualitative work. This is not all of the ways you can do data collection using qualitative approach, but we're going to at least show you kind of an overview of the most common, I would say the top four that we typically see. These are participant observation, in-depth interviews, focus groups, and analyzing existing data. In qualitative work, you'd be analyzing existing like texts or photos or artifacts. And then I mentioned this earlier, but in qualitative data, you're primarily been using what's called purposive sampling. Like you're really going into it saying like, who are the people? What are the existing resources that can really help me answer my question? If I'm wanting to understand the experience, I was thinking about in our room, Francine was going to be planning for some focus group with elders. If you know that you want to have the experience of aging, you're going to want to talk to elders, right? You're not going to recruit young adults because they're not going to help you with that experience of what you're trying to understand. So you have a very clear kind of vision of who are the people that best could answer your research question. And that's who you want to join you in these conversations. So thinking about participant observation, here you're just observing how people act and maybe even interact in social situations. There's different ways of doing this. In some cases, particularly if the research has a lot more time to be embedded, this is very often, I see more often in probably anthropology, where you have more of a long-term kind of time commitment available to you to actually be and live and be a part of a community. So you're actually kind of a participant in that space in which you're also doing observations of kind of the cultural norms and things that you see in that community. I've been a part more of things where you're kind of coming and observing the social world, but you're not engaging in it, but you're more kind of observing and kind of seeing what happens in that context. And these can be really helpful. Like I'm thinking of like clinical settings, just observing what it's like to go see people come into a waiting room where they're coming in for their cancer treatments. Like, what does that feel like? What does it look like? What are the behaviors you're seeing that people are doing? Kind of understanding just from observing can be really helpful as a practitioner to figure out, what that experience is like just from watching. And then you typically with this, your data collection instrument is going to be, you'll have some kind of either observational guide with maybe kind of key areas of things you're going to make note of and taking field notes. And we kind of mentioned this a little bit already, but if you're an observer, you're really kind of doing this outside looking in. And if you're doing participant observation, you're really doing more of an insider's view of what's happening. And so in participant observation, you're a little bit of an eavesdropper, right? You're trying to observe people without them knowing you're observing them, because you don't want them knowing you're observing them because that may change their behavior, right? So if I know, if I'm being watched and I'm ordering, let's say, food at a restaurant, maybe I'll order the salad, instead of the cheeseburger I really wanted to get, So you want to kind of avoid that kind of social desirability that, that people may change their behaviors if they know they're being kind of watched. And again, participant observation, you're in that space for a period of time, and this also seems too that you're going to have a sense of people are going to know why you're there, and that they're going to accept the fact that you're there and be willing to share their stories and help you be part of that, observing kind of their community and what's happening there. So the advantages, clearly, if you're watching people in the context of which you're trying to answer a research question, you're getting a lot of information. So if I'm observing, I'm seeing lots of verbal, nonverbal cues and different things that people do and how they interact. And you're gathering the information in a natural environment. This isn't a laboratory or controlled setting. And so that kind of the amount of information you can get of an understanding of an issue by seeing it in action is really a great advantage of this method. Disadvantage is, you're a human being. Hopefully you're not just doing this all by yourself. Hopefully you're going back and talking about what you saw with other people on your research team. So you're avoiding any sense of subjectivity that you may have in your interpretations of your observations. I mentioned earlier this social desirability bias. So people will tend to change behaviors if they think that that's what is more socially desirable, especially if they know they're being observed. And of course, this requires a lot of upfront planning. And sometimes IRBs, they're not going to get in your way, but they're also going to probably ask a lot of questions about what's going on here, and you're putting yourself in this environment, and how are you avoiding risks and things like that. So, so that's participant observation. And then next is in-depth interviews. This would be doing one-on-one discussions with people, and you're trying here to identify their individual perceptions, beliefs, feelings, and experiences about your issue at hand. And your instrument guide is going to be your interview guide. So you'll usually go in with a series of questions. The interview guide, this takes some time to develop those thoughtfully. Very often I'll develop a draft of interview guide. We'll pilot test it, we'll refine it. We'll maybe even show it to like our community advisory board, get their feedback, refine it before you actually enroll people into the interview, because you want to make sure you're asking the right questions and you want to make sure you're asking them the right way to really capture the information. In interviews, there is a range. I usually most often see semi-structured interviews done where you have a specific topic area, you have a set of open-ended questions. So they're still open to new ideas, hence the idea of semi-structured. So you don't have closed-ended questions. All things are about like, tell me how this happened for you. You know, you want to make sure you're avoiding questions that people can just say yes or no to as the response. Unstructured interviews would be really just kind of going with some open topics and kind of just really letting that discussion flow, but not as common as semi-structured. And structured interviews I've only ever seen used for me, in my experience, is maybe you want to have a little less flexibility in the interview. I've seen this used when maybe you have a lot of people going out and doing interviews on a project and you want to have kind of a relatively structured way that everyone's going about doing that data collection. So that's where you might want to have more of a structured approach. Advantages here, you get a lot of in-depth information. You're learning about someone's personal experiences. And this is particularly good for sensitive issues. And this is something I often have to talk with people about when they're planning for focus groups or interviews. They may say, oh, I think I'm gonna do focus groups on that topic. But then you think, well, what are you asking people to talk about? Are they gonna feel comfortable talking about that in a group of people? Or is that be something that would be better suited for more of a one-on-one conversation? You may lose some context and some depth of information if it's something that's more sensitive and more private that they don't want to talk about in a group of people. So kind of thinking about that. And then of course you have confidentiality because it's just you and them and you can work to ensure their privacy. Disadvantages, kind of an advantage of focus group, right, is that when you have people, a small group talking about something, you have that interaction. You can see kind of information from that interaction and they can actually, you know, bring more conversation and as people bring in new ideas. So you kind of lose that in a one-on-one interview. And of course, you probably will need multiple interviews to gather a range of perspectives. So it may take a little more time. And this is like any research has this limitation. When you're asking people to do a survey, same thing when you're asking them to do an interview, you're relying on them for self-reporting information in a way that so it relies on you to build a lot of rapport. So that hopefully what they're reporting to you is the true essence of their experience, and they're not holding back, and they're kind of being honest with you about when you're asking these questions. And then focus groups. In this case, you're trying to really get a range of opinions on a specific issue. And so usually these will have 6 to 8 people. I would not recommend any more than that because you could be there for hours if you have too many people, right? You want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak and be heard. And to have that dialogue, you want to plan for those to be in a reasonable size group of people. And again, you're capturing that interactional data, and your research instrument is going to be your discussion guide. So the key questions, the things you're going to be asking them to just consider as a group. Advantages, group interaction. You're going to get a lot of range of issues and opinions in one setting. You can, with that, because there's that kind of group discussion, it gives you opportunity to kind of ask for more detail, get clarification on understanding, and really can get a big breadth of an issue more efficiently, right? Because you're bringing, instead of doing 6 individual interviews, you're bringing together 6 people at once to talk about it. Again, only if it's a topic that people would feel comfortable talking about in a group setting. Disadvantages, you could also get less depth of information because people maybe you're not going as long with one person. You're kind of trying to get a group of people's ideas and thoughts on something. So maybe they won't go as in depth. I already mentioned this, it's not suitable for private experiences. As a focus group moderator, I'll tell you, managing group dynamics, boy, you want to go into those things prepared, because you can have someone like me who's an overtalker and someone who's an external processor and someone who's more quiet, and you have to kind of manage those dynamics. So you make sure that people that are quiet kind of get the chance to speak up, and you also are kind of making sure everyone feels invited but not disengaged. So you have to kind of manage those kind of human dynamics. And of course, you always ask people in focus groups to consider confidentiality. There's typically a discussion around, we've invited you here today for a research project to talk about this issue. we are going to maintain confidentiality in what we report. We'll never report who came to these focus groups. We're asking you to honor each other. And as you leave this focus group, not go back to your community and say, oh, I was just in a focus group with my neighbor so-and-so, you know, just in casual conversations. So you have to ask the participants to kind of help with that confidentiality. And then the last piece is analyzing existing resources. So you're going to be gathering data from, could be personal journals, could be historical documents, news stories, videos, audio recording, photography, social media. And then you're going to use that to kind of qualitatively work to understand an issue. Advantages, the data is already there. Great. We don't have all that time and effort to recruit people and plan and do all those processes of collecting the data. And these typically go quickly through IRB because most often you're gathering thing that is more publicly available data. It's already de-identified in some way. And it's an unobtrusive methodology, right? You're not asking for anyone's time to do this work. But the disadvantage is also that the data already exists. So let's say I have a whole series of documents and I have this purpose that I'm trying to accomplish, and I look through all my documents and I have more questions. Well, that's all the data I have. So maybe I'm going to have to plan for a follow-up study where I maybe do some interviews or other things. So if the data might not answer all the questions, based on what's there, as you don't have, and you can't clarify meaning if it's not there in those resources that you're mining for your project. And so now Julie is going to lead us into our
That's me.
breakout room. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So next breakout room activity, think about the questions that you had in your first breakout room and identify the data collection methods. It may be one method, it may be multiple that would be best to answer your research question. And then identify the groups of people from whom you want to collect data. And we're going to discuss the reasons why you've chosen those methods and you know, which people you're going to collect the data from. So just take a minute here while we're all in the same room and think about this. And think about the methods that we've shared with you: participant observation, interviews, focus groups, analyzing existing content, social media, etc. And just take a minute to jot down what type of data collection method or types, which types might be best for collection, and then who you want to collect it from. And then I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms. And Naomi, did I hear you correctly earlier or read something that you have someone there with you? So it's two of you there?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm counting for the rooms based on two people with Naomi. Okay. All right. We're going to send you back.
Julie, you're seeing your presenter view. Do you want me to share?
No, I can, I just have
Okay.
I have to swap.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem.
I never know which one. So you're seeing the correct slides, I assume, but let me go to the correct actual slide. Sorry about that. Here we go. I don't know how to move it to the right slide. I don't know what happened.
It's a review, a really quick review for everybody.
Yeah. So, so did you catch all that? Welcome back, everybody. We had a great discussion in our breakout room. I think it was really rich, and I think it kind of led us to realize that, you know, we need a little bit more time to discuss these things. And so that was noted, I'm sure. But we want to discuss data analysis with you, and we know that we don't have much more time, and we want to allow for some discussion, questions, comments, thoughts, and know that this data analysis piece, we're just giving you highlights and trying to clue you into the resources that you might need for analysis. Really, I think the key points about data analysis that we want you to take away from this are a couple of things. As Heather mentioned, that in addition to data collection, analysis can take some time to do, but it should start the minute that you begin collecting data. So actually bullet point number 3 here, is really a key point for me. It's an ongoing and iterative process, and it really begins during data collection. So as you're doing interviews or focus groups, you are also, you know, listening to what people are saying and tweaking your interview guide if necessary, starting to think about areas where you should maybe probe a little bit deeper, but looking at, like, what are the components of data analysis? Really, you're looking at transcribed data from interviews or focus groups or content from already existing documents, and that can be lots and lots of pages of transcription or content. You need to take a lot of content and reduce it to codes and themes. And I'm going to use the term code and theme interchangeably here in order to answer your research question. So people do this a couple of ways. A common way to do it is to do a content analysis, look at what people are saying, and code it. Identify the themes that are coming up, create codes from those themes, and then that is your, you know, content analysis. But then they take that and do constant comparison. So, okay, we've coded this particular piece of text with, you know, barriers to care. We were talking about barriers to prostate cancer screening in our group. So we've coded it, barriers to screening. How does this person talk about those barriers in comparison to this other segment that we've coded barriers to screening, spoken by somebody else in the research? So, you know, it's an ongoing process of comparing and contrasting. And there's a kind of balance between structure and flexibility. You do have a code list, but I'll talk about later that, you know, you may come in with some a priori codes, but then it's expected that some codes will come from the data. But importantly, you need to track everything that you do. Audit trails are key, as it says here, because you're going to report this analysis, and reviewers will expect you to explain what you've done. So this is just a really, like, 5-point explanation about the data analysis process. Again, you need to, you know, wrangle a lot of data, identify themes, interpret what those themes mean, interpret differences, understand the variation within those themes, verify that you have coded accurately. So oftentimes in qualitative data, we triangulate data very carefully to make sure that we're not misinterpreting what someone is telling us. And then we report it. We report our findings. So as I mentioned earlier, your codes or your themes can be deductive or inductive. So the deductive process is when you come in with some codes you're expecting to see. If you're asking questions about barriers to cancer screening, as Heather and I have done before, we put together a code list that reflected our questions, which we expected people to talk about those barriers because we asked them about them. And so those are some of our a priori codes. And then as we read through the transcripts and coded, our team also open coded, so found themes that we didn't necessarily go into the research expecting to find. And I know in our group, we talked about that experience for some of the researchers who are part of this call, where they discovered a theme that they didn't expect. And so that would be open coding. And but the result is a kind of unified, what I've called a code tree. Not everybody calls it that, but a code list. So, and importantly, this is why kind of analysis takes so much time, because coding is an iterative process as well. So the first step will start through this diagram. This is a lovely diagram, thanks to Heather for putting it together. Read the transcript before coding. So all the coders read the transcript completely. Then you create some initial codes. Those might be a priori codes. Those might be some codes that emerged in the reading of the transcript. Code 2 to 3 transcripts. And then importantly, and this is how you get inter-rater reliability, the coding team meets to talk through those transcripts and talk about how they applied those codes, because those codes need to be clearly defined so that everyone on the team uses them similarly. And they're coding the same types of text with those codes. So you do that a number of times where you're coming back together, establishing inter-rater reliability with your team and making sure that everyone is using the codes in the same way. Then you create a final code structure, and your coding team can really apply the codes to the transcript or the content. And you can feel confident that the results will be consistent across coders. And so, as I mentioned, we're trying to get you thinking about the resources that you might need, human and otherwise. So along the kind of the bottom of this slide, you'll see a number of qualitative data analysis software programs: the Deduce, Atlas TI, In Vivo, MaxQDA. They can be somewhat costly. So you really need to think about what type of data, how much data you have, how many team members you have, to determine whether you want to use some sort of specialized qualitative data analysis software, or something like Excel or Word, where you could potentially code the data if you don't have a lot of data and if you don't have a huge team. The other thing is that these software programs will not really do any analyses for you. They are a method for bringing some order around a lot of data. So you also need to consider your team's comfort in using the software, because you need to train people to use it. And also what theory you're using to guide the research. If you're doing a grounded theory analysis, you really need to use software to do that guided theory analysis, because you're developing theory from the data that you're collecting. So as I said, high level, but it gives you a sense of the resources you might need. These are two articles from BMJ assessing quality in qualitative research and analyzing qualitative data that are often useful. I share them with the medical residents who I teach about qualitative research. And then Qualitative Inquiry and Research Design is a textbook that Heather uses quite a bit. And it looks really great. And I think Heather's putting some links in the chat. And so you should be able to access those. And we just want to open it up to your questions and thoughts. And I'm going to, you see Austin and Sarah have very generously allowed us to share their email addresses. We wanted you to meet and engage with some other qualitative researchers as well, because we're around. And I'm going to end the slideshow and open it up for questions.
And we'll make the slides, the PDF of the slides available. I was going to upload that file in the chat, but it won't let me. It says access to file restricted by your account admin. So I'll send it to Maria. She can send it to everybody that RSVP'd for the event, the PDF of the slides.
Any lingering questions?
Well, I'll just make a comment. I understand now much better about what both of you do with your research projects and have a better understanding of the depth of what you need to do.
Thank you.
I will also just take a moment. I apologize. There's yard work being done in, I don't know if you can hear that or not. But I am the program coordinator of evaluation for the Partnership for Native American Cancer Prevention. I also have a qualitative research background, and it was interesting to listen to everyone's research. And we actually, with the program evaluation, do a mixed method approach in collecting data about program progress and make sure that we're meeting our goals that are requirements for the funding agency. So part of that is, if you wouldn't mind taking about 5 minutes, I just sent a link in the chat to do a quick evaluation for us. That would be excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for being here today, everybody, and being good sports in the breakout rooms. I know you weren't expecting to be interactive, but we appreciated that. And I'll stop talking while you do the evaluation.
No questions? No thoughts, anybody?
I think they're all doing the eval, which is great.
Yeah. Thank you for doing the evaluation.
I have a question about recording and what's the pros and cons, like for instance, for the interviews, to record the interviews or not record them, just make good notes.
I always prefer to record if the person is comfortable with that. We always ask their permission first, though. And the reason why I prefer that, if they feel comfortable, is because then you as the interviewer can really just be present, active listening, with what's happening, not worried about trying to jot down notes. And also, if they are okay with being recorded, then you get a lot more contextual data that you have, because you can actually pull the direct quotes from people. And sometimes the ways in which people express things, it's hard to capture notes, right? However, if they do say, I'm not comfortable, then I just kind of say as interviewer, I'm like, totally understand it. We won't record. I'm going to be taking thorough notes. So if I'm not looking at you all the time, it's because I'm just trying to write everything down you're saying. So I just kind of prepare them for the fact that, it's going to maybe a little more pausing, and that I am listening to you, but I'm also trying to make sure I'm not missing any of your information.
So in that setting, would be, for instance, useful to have two people, like one that it's interviewing, the other one that's making notes, and then kind of reading the notes after the interview to just see if that person also like kind of catch what the interviewer was thinking as well.
Absolutely, that's a great idea. And we've done that. I've done a lot with students too, when they're trying to learn about these methods too. It's a good opportunity for them to like listen and be the note taker. And one thing I didn't mention in focus groups, I always have a note taker, even if it's being recorded, because as a moderator, then I can just be focused in on guiding the discussion and making sure we're moving things along and everyone's feeling heard. And then, as to your point, the note taker then at the end of the focus group can say, here are all the things that we heard from everyone today. Is there anything we missed? Is this accurate? And that's a way of doing what in qualitative work we call member checking, where you're kind of validating that you've heard the right information from the people. Right. So that's just another way of just improving kind of the reliability and the validity of your work for others, because that you've said that, yeah, we've confirmed this with the people that shared their stories.
Naomi has a thought or a question.
I have a question about transcribing. Do you have a preferred, I don't know, is a website? I know you can send them out as well to be transcribed professionally. And then is there a ballpark number you can give us for how much we should budget if we're doing a focus group for transcribing?
We forgot to do that in that part about analysis. Yeah. Sarah has a thought. No. I thought you were raising your hand. I don't know. Does it? So
I could have one, but you go.
I could think about it. I could find one of my recent invoices and tell you. I don't know if others have something more top of mind.
I would just say the focus groups are a little more expensive. So how they price it typically is it's like number of people in the conversation, right? So I think I've had interviews be transcribed for like I'm totally guessing off of budgets, like around $1 or so, a minute, but it could be more expensive for focus groups. I will say, even if you get it professionally transcribed, you always still need to have someone listen back and read the transcript, because even the professional transcription people, there might be something that's nuanced, or someone says something like me too fast and they didn't hear it the right way. And so you want to like have someone go back and do it's kind of a quality check, but that's less work than physically transcribing though. I would say that's just listening and just verifying. And then there are some auto transcription things that happen. For example, like in Zoom, those are very inaccurate, but you can use them. It's gonna be more work on your end. It might be free, but you're gonna have to do a lot more work to kind of clean it up, because they're getting better, I think, but they're still not as accurate as a professional transcription service.
So what would you recommend for our group where we are not qualitative researchers? Do you recommend we send it out for professional and then read it?
How many are you doing?
We're just doing one focus group for this pilot.
I mean, Julie, what do you think? I think they could probably just rely on the auto transcription of Zoom and do really strong, involved kind of listening, quality checking, making sure it's accurate. for
That sounds
one.
like a good student job as well.
It does.
It
And that's starting, and Naomi, that's also starting the analysis. So keep in mind
Yeah.
that quality check is your first phase of your analysis, because you're already starting to kind of go back and listen in and kind of thinking about what you're hearing. So it's helpful.
I was going to say that actually, it's not thankless work. That really, that student who listens and quality checks the transcript knows the story very well and can really help with analysis. So it's good work. Yeah, I would say Zoom is getting more accurate actually with their transcriptions. And so I think it's fair to do Zoom. Another vendor who I've never used, but colleagues have used, rev.com. And I have a person who I really trust, and so I just use him all the time. His company is called Wordsworth, and they're on the East Coast, and they're pretty fast, but they're not as inexpensive as, well, certainly not as inexpensive as Zoom, but good question. We forgot that very important resource piece as we were telling you about budgeting. It's 4:30. I wonder if we should let everybody go. Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you. We lost.
Thank you guys, both you and Heather. I really appreciated presenting this. I learned a lot, which is saying something for 100% quantitative analysis person, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And
Thank
thanks
you.
to Austin and Sarah. It looks like Sarah
Yes,
had to hop
Sarah had
off
to
for
log
another
off
one.
because she had to go. She had a child in daycare she's got to get to. So she sent me a private message, just had to log off. So
Okay, but thanks
Yeah,
to,
thank
you
you.
both. Thanks to you both for helping out with this and facilitating the groups, which is hard work. And it's good to see everybody. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.